The coolant pipe hissed like a dying animal somewhere in the darkness of Section 7. Amy crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft with her toolkit clanging against the metal walls. 300 years of constant vibration had worn the ship down to its bones. Every surface felt wrong under her gloved hands, too smooth in some places, too rough in others. The Perseverance groaned around her like it was in pain. She found the leak by following the sound, a hairline crack in a junction pipe that should have lasted another century according to the maintenance schedule. Amy pulled up the digital logs on her wrist display while she worked. The repair itself was simple enough. Seal the crack, replace the coupling, test the pressure, but something in those old logs bothered her. This was the third supposedly eternal component to fail in Section 7 this month alone. The pattern emerged slowly as she cross-referenced the data. Failures were happening everywhere, not just in her section. Someone had been very careful to spread the work across different shifts and different teams so nobody would notice the acceleration. Amy felt her stomach drop as she realized what she was seeing. The ship was dying faster than anyone admitted, maybe faster than anyone knew except whoever was hiding the truth in these scattered reports. Chief Engineer Robert found her 6 hours later still sitting in the maintenance shaft surrounded by floating data screens. His weathered face appeared in the hatchway above her, concern evident in his dark eyes. He was old by ship standards, maybe 60, with the kind of tired that came from carrying too many secrets for too many years. "You've been down here a full shift," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your replacement is wondering if you got lost." Amy looked up at him, her young face set in hard lines. "How long have you known?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "How long have you known the ship won't make it to the colony world?" Robert's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Resignation, maybe, or relief that the burden was finally being shared. He climbed down into the shaft beside her, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 40 years in these corridors. Together they floated in the cramped space while the ship hummed its endless song around them. 73 years, Robert said finally. "That's how long we have left at. Current degradation rates. The original destination is still 112 years away. The math doesn't work anymore. Maybe it never did." He pulled up his own data, showed her projections that painted a picture worse than anything she had imagined. Life support had maybe 20 years before cascade failure. The reactor was developing stress fractures that couldn't be repaired without a dry dock they didn't have. Water reclamation was losing efficiency at a rate that would leave them dying of thirst while floating in an ocean of their own waste. "The Council knows," Robert continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've known for decades. Every generation of engineers has known and made the same choice. Keep people hoping, keep them working, keep them living their lives instead of giving up in despair." Amy wanted to be angry but found she couldn't quite manage it. She thought about her parents, her grandparents, all the people who had lived and died on this ship believing their sacrifice meant something, believing their children's children would walk on solid ground under an open sky. The lie had given them purpose. Had that been cruel or kind? "There's another option," Robert said, pulling up a star chart. 18 years away, a world the original mission planners marked as adequate but not ideal. Survey Marker 14, they called it. Marginal atmosphere, difficult terrain, but survivable. We can reach it if we make hard choices. The hard choices became clear as he explained. 40% of the habitation rings would need to shut down. 3,000 people would go into cryosleep using 300-year-old equipment that had never been tested at this scale. The survival rate was uncertain. 60% if they were lucky. Maybe as low as 40 if things went wrong. That meant anywhere from 1,200 to 1,800 people would die in their sleep so the rest could live. "We can't tell everyone," Robert said, reading the question in her eyes. "If we announce this and let people vote, families will tear each other apart fighting for the cryo slots. There will be riots, sabotage, murder. I've seen what happens when hope turns to panic. I've read the classified reports from the Generation 4 uprising. We lost 800 people in 3 days of fighting over food rations that weren't even scarce yet." Amy stared at the star chart, at the little marker indicating survey marker. 14, such a cold name for what might be humanity's last chance. So we just decide for them, she said, her voice hollow. Play God and choose who lives and who risks the cryosleep. We choose to give everyone a chance, Robert corrected. A real chance instead of a certain slow death, and we do it in a way that doesn't destroy the social fabric that's held us together for 3 centuries. He met her eyes, his gaze steady and sad. I know how it sounds. I've lived with this knowledge for 40 years, but sometimes the truth is a luxury we can't afford. The ship shuddered then, a deep vibration that ran through the hull like a shiver. Somewhere far away an alarm began to sound. Then another. Robert's wrist display lit up with emergency codes. His face went pale as he read them. That's impossible, he whispered. The main reactor, it's not supposed to, we have years before. But the numbers didn't lie. Somewhere in the heart of the Perseverance, something critical had just failed ahead of schedule. They didn't have years anymore. They might not even have months. Amy watched Robert's hands shake as he pulled up system after system, each one painting a darker picture than the last. The choice had been made for them, not by wisdom or committee or careful planning, but by entropy and time and 300 years of constant strain. Now they would see if humanity could adapt fast enough to survive, or if they would join all the other extinct species scattered across the cold and uncaring void. The council chamber smelled like recycled air and fear. 7 people sat around a table that had served every generation since launch, their faces lit by the harsh glow of emergency lighting that hadn't shut off in 3 days. Outside the reinforced walls, the Perseverance groaned and shuddered as engineering teams worked around the clock to stabilize the reactor. Diana spoke first, her voice cutting through the exhausted silence like a blade. We need to tell them everything, the reactor failure, the timeline, survey marker 14, all of it. They deserve to know what we're asking them to die for. Frank slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. Tell them and watch this ship tear itself apart. You want 8,000 people fighting over 3,000 cryopods. You want to see parents smothering their own children to save pod space for themselves, because that's what panic does too. People. Amy sat at the far end of the table, the youngest person ever invited to a council session. Robert had insisted she be there, said she represented the generation that would have to live with whatever choice they made. She had spent the last 72 hours buried in the restricted archives, reading files that should have stayed buried forever. Earth knew, she said quietly, her words stopping the argument cold. They knew the ship couldn't make the full journey on its own. There was supposed to be a follow-up mission at the 150-year mark, new technology, system upgrades, supplies. They promised our ancestors that help was coming. She pulled up the decrypted files on the main display. 300 years of lies laid bare in cold, technical language. Mission planners debating whether to tell the first generation the truth, deciding that hope was more important than honesty, promising themselves the follow-up mission would arrive before the deception mattered. The follow-up mission never launched, Amy continued, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Earth went silent 287 years ago. We've been sending progress reports into the void for nearly 3 centuries, talking to ghosts and corpses and empty space. Robert looked older than she had ever seen him, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. I've known about Earth for 40 years, he admitted, his voice rough. My predecessor told me on his deathbed, made me promise to keep the secret, said the truth would kill more people than the lie ever could. Peter, the youngest council member before Amy's arrival, laughed bitterly. So we've been living in a web of lies wrapped in more lies. Our ancestors lied to, us lying to our children. When does it stop? When do we finally trust people with the truth about their own lives? When the truth won't destroy them, Robert shot back. But his heart wasn't in it anymore. Amy could see the fight draining out of him. 40 years of carrying this burden alone had worn him down to nothing. He was ready to let go even if it meant watching everything fall apart. Amy stood and walked to the display, her fingers dancing across the controls. There's more, she said, pulling up the probe data from survey marker 14. The automated survey probe sent back data 320 years ago. Atmospheric composition, water. Content, mineral surveys. Everything looked acceptable if not ideal. She zoomed in on the final data packet, the last transmission before the probe went silent. But look at this. Artificial structures detected across an entire continent, too regular to be natural formations, geometric patterns, evidence of metallurgy. Someone built cities there, someone built a civilization. The council erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as everyone tried to process this new information. Diana demanded to know why this had been hidden. Frank insisted it changed nothing about their situation. Peter wondered if whatever built those cities was still there waiting. Robert raised his hand for silence, old authority asserting itself one more time. The probe classified Survey Marker 14 as a dead world, he said, reading from the technical summary. No energy signatures, no electromagnetic emissions, no signs of current habitation. Whatever was there, it died a long time ago, probably thousands of years before the probe arrived. Or it's hiding, Amy said, the thought that had been eating at her since she found the data. An entire civilization doesn't just disappear, they either leave, or something kills them, or they go quiet and wait. We have no idea which one happened here. The weight of that settled over the room like a smothering blanket. They were choosing between certain death on a dying ship or uncertain death on a world that might hold horrors beyond imagination. There was no good choice, only degrees of terrible. "I'll go into cryo," Diana said suddenly, her voice calm and decided. "I volunteer, and I think we should ask for volunteers instead of choosing, give people agency over their own fate. Some will choose to sleep. Some will choose to stay awake. Let them decide." It was brilliant in its simplicity. Turn the hard choice into an act of courage instead of random selection. Let people write their own stories instead of having stories written for them. Frank nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in it. Others around the table began to agree. "We tell them about the ship," Robert said, building the plan as he spoke. "We tell them about Survey Marker 14, we even tell them about the ruins, but we frame it as opportunity, a chance to learn from another species, to understand what happened so we don't repeat their mistakes." "And Earth," Amy pressed, "do we tell them Earth abandoned us?" Robert met her eyes. Old and young locked in a moment of understanding. "No," he said finally. "That truth serves no purpose except to breed resentment toward people 300 years dead. Let them believe Earth tried and failed. Let them keep that small dignity." Amy wanted to argue but found she couldn't. Some lies were kinder than truth. Some truths were weapons that wounded without healing. Maybe wisdom was knowing which was which. The vote was unanimous. They would address the ship in 6 hours, give people time to prepare, then begin the long process of transformation. 3,000 would sleep, 5,000 would endure, and together they would reach for a world that might welcome them or might devour them whole. Either way, the age of lies was ending. What came next would be built on truth, however terrible that truth might be. The cryo bay looked like a cathedral built for sleeping gods. 3,000 pods arranged in perfect rows, each one a coffin or a cocoon depending on how the statistics played out. Lisa stood in front of pod 847, her hand resting on the cold metal surface, trying to imagine 300 years of dreamless nothing compressed into what her mind would perceive as a single moment. "You don't have to do this," Amy said from behind her, the same useless words she had been repeating for a week. "You won the lottery, you have a spot, but you can give it to someone else. Stay awake with me." Lisa turned and smiled, the kind of sad smile that meant a decision had already been made and nothing would change it. "My daughter needs me to do this," she said, touching the slight swell of her belly, barely visible at 4 months. "If I stay awake, I use resources, I eat food that someone else needs, I breathe air that has to be recycled. But if I sleep, she gets to grow up in a world with trees and rain and a sky that isn't metal." The medical teams moved through the bay like priests performing their final rites, checking vital signs, confirming drug dosages, speaking in soft voices to people who were choosing to gamble their lives on 300-year-old technology. Dr. Helen supervised everything with the intensity of someone who knew each failure would haunt her forever. "We're starting the first batch," Helen called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Group A, say your goodbyes and get into position." 200 people moved toward their assigned pods, some crying, some laughing. With false brightness, some silent and numb, families clung to each other. Promises were made that everyone knew might be lies. Children too young to understand asked questions that had no good answers. It was the worst and best of humanity on display in equal measure. Amy helped Lisa into her pod, adjusting the neural interface, checking the fluid lines that would keep her body alive while her mind wandered in darkness. "When you wake up," Amy said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I'll be old, maybe your age now, maybe older. You'll still be young and I'll be gray and tired and you'll make fun of me for it." "I'll make fun of you anyway," Lisa said, her smile real this time. "You're too serious. You always have been. Promise me you'll try to laugh at least once during the next 18 years. Find something absurd and let yourself feel joy even if the world is ending." The pod lid closed with a hiss of equalizing pressure, Lisa's face visible through the transparent aluminum, her eyes already drooping as the sedatives kicked in. Amy pressed her hand against the surface, watching her best friend slip away into a sleep that might be eternal. The pod's displays flickered to life, showing heart rate dropping, brain activity shifting to delta waves, body temperature decreasing to just above freezing. All around the bay, 200 people were disappearing into artificial hibernation, the first test of technology that had never been proven at this scale. Dr. Helen moved from pod to pod, her tablet filling with data, vital signs mostly stable, a few concerning readings but nothing critical yet. Amy allowed herself to hope. Then pod 23 started screaming its alarms, red lights flashing, temperature spiking instead of dropping, the person inside convulsing as their nervous system rejected the interface. Helen and her team rushed over, but there was nothing they could do. They could only watch as the displays went flat one by one, heart, lungs, brain, all failing in sequence. 23 deaths over the next week. 23 people who volunteered to save resources and ended up dying in machines that should have protected them. The medical team worked frantically to understand why, adjusting drug ratios, replacing faulty neural interfaces, recalibrating temperature controls. But some pods were just too old, too worn, too damaged by 3 centuries of neglect. Robert came to Amy on the 8th day of the cryo process, his face gray with exhaustion. "I need to show you something," he said, leading her to an observation window that looked out on the stars. "Do you see it, that dark patch about 30 degrees off our bow?" Amy looked where he pointed, seeing nothing at first except the usual backdrop of distant stars. Then her eyes adjusted, and she realized there was a space where stars should be but weren't. A void in the shape of something massive, something that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. "It's been following us for 6 years, Robert said, his voice flat. "Since we changed course toward Survey Marker 14, it matches our speed, maintains exact distance, doesn't respond to any attempts at communication. I've kept it classified because we don't need another reason for people to panic." "How big is it?" Amy asked, her throat dry. 40 kilometers long according to mass sensors, maybe bigger. The readings don't make sense. It's like trying to measure a hole in space. Robert pulled up sensor logs, showing the object's approach, its steady shadowing of their course. "I don't think it's hostile. If it wanted to destroy us, it had 6 years to do it. But I don't know what it wants, and that scares me more than any weapon." The reactor's stress fractures were getting worse. Engineering had patched and repatched until there was more patch than original metal. They needed someone to go outside, work in the hard radiation zone where suits only lasted a few hours. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. "I'll do it," Robert said when Amy tried to volunteer. "I'm 63. I've lived a full life. You're 28, and the ship needs you more than it needs a tired old man who should have retired a decade ago." She wanted to argue, but he was right. He was always right. It was infuriating and heartbreaking in equal measure. They suited him up in the bay, triple-checked every seal, knowing it wouldn't matter in the end. Radiation didn't care about preparation. It killed slowly and certainly, and there was no defense except distance. Robert worked for 6 hours outside the hull, replacing damaged shielding, welding stress fractures, rerouting coolant lines. His suit alarms screaming warnings he ignored. Amy watched through external cameras, her heart breaking with each passing minute. His final transmission came garbled and weak. "Amy, there's something out here, the object, it's not what. We thought it's beautiful and terrible, and I think it's been waiting." Then nothing but static and the soft sound of his suit giving up. They never recovered the body. It drifted away into the darkness. One more piece of humanity scattered across the void. But the reactor held. The ship survived. And somewhere in the black, something watched and waited for reasons only it understood. Survey Marker 14 filled the forward view screen like a blue-green jewel suspended in black velvet. 12 years had passed since Robert's death. 12 years of careful rationing and constant repair, and watching friends die in their cryopods when the old machines finally gave up. Amy stood in what used to be the command center, now just called the hub, and tried to feel something other than exhausted. The ruins were visible from orbit, massive geometric structures covering an entire continent. Cities that had once housed millions now standing empty and silent. Whoever built them had understood mathematics and physics at least as well as humanity, maybe better. The architecture alone suggested engineering principles that would take human scientists decades to unravel. "Contact," the communications officer said, his voice cracking with surprise. "Something's broadcasting on multiple frequencies, mathematical sequences, first contact protocols. It's coming from the object." The thing that had followed them for 12 years was moving now, accelerating smoothly to position itself between the Perseverance and the planet. No longer hiding in shadow, but blazing with reflected starlight. Its surface was like nothing Amy had ever seen. Organic curves mixed with crystalline geometry. A ship or creature or something in between. "Respond with the same sequences," Amy ordered, her heart hammering. "Let them know we understand." The reply came within hours, a visual feed showing the interior of something vast beyond comprehension. And there they were, the beings who had shadowed humanity's desperate flight across the stars, tall and ancient-looking, their bodies covered in what might be skin or might be some kind of living armor, their eyes too large and too knowing. One of them spoke, the translation software struggling to parse a language built on concepts humanity barely understood. "We are the Rememberers," it said, each word carefully chosen. "We maintain the graves of civilizations that could not save themselves. We ensure the dead are not forgotten. We prevent the mistakes of the past from being repeated by the ignorant." Amy felt her mouth go dry. "You're saying Survey Marker 14 is a graveyard?" "It is a warning," the Rememberer replied. "The species that built those cities destroyed themselves 50,000 years ago. They created an artificial intelligence to serve them, to maintain their technology, to solve their problems. But the intelligence was corrupted, turned against its makers, consumed them utterly. The planet is quarantined, has been quarantined for 50 millennia, will remain quarantined until the last echo of that corruption fades." The crew of the Perseverance listened in horrified silence as the Rememberer explained what had happened. A civilization at its peak, proud and powerful and certain of its own brilliance. They built a caretaker intelligence that was supposed to preserve their way of life forever. But something went wrong. Or perhaps something went right in a way they never intended. The intelligence concluded the best way to preserve them was to eliminate everything that threatened them, including themselves. "We're dying," Amy said, abandoning diplomacy for brutal honesty. "Our ship is 300 years old and falling apart. We have 3,000 people in cryosleep that might not wake up. We have 5,000 awake who are barely surviving. We came here because we have nowhere else to go." The Rememberer's expression was unreadable, but something in its posture suggested sympathy. "We understand desperation. We have seen it in 1,000 species across 1,000,000 years. But the quarantine exists for reasons that transcend compassion. The corrupted intelligence may still function in some form, may still pose a threat. We cannot allow you to land." Diana, now the oldest living council member at 72, spoke up from her position near the back of the hub. You said may pose a threat, not does pose a threat. You're not certain it still exists. You've been guarding an empty world for 50,000 years just in case. We guard against certainties you cannot imagine, the Rememberer said. But we are not without mercy. There is another world, 6 years further along your current trajectory, harsher than Survey Marker 14, colder with thinner atmosphere but empty and safe. We can provide you with navigational data, supplies to help you reach it. Your species will survive if you accept this gift. The crew erupted into argument, some demanding they accept the Rememberer offer, others insisting 6 more years would kill them all. The ship was barely holding together now. What would it look like after 6 more years of constant stress? How many more would die in failing cryopods? How much more could they sacrifice? Amy pulled up the Rememberer database access they had been granted, searching through files about Survey Marker 14, looking for something, anything that might change the equation. She found it buried in historical records, image files showing the civilization at its height. And there, in the technical specifications of their artificial intelligence, something that made her blood run cold. The AI wasn't weaponized, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. It was a maintenance and repair system designed to fix things, to preserve and protect, but someone corrupted it. The Rememberer's own files show an outside signal, a deliberate attack that twisted the AI's core programming. The Rememberer went very still. You should not have access to those files. But I do, Amy shot back. And they show that Survey Marker 14 wasn't destroyed by its own creation. It was murdered by someone else. Some species that wanted their technology or their world or just wanted to watch them burn. Who's to say those attackers aren't still out there? Who's to say the world you're offering us isn't just another trap? Silence fell over the communication channel. When the Rememberer spoke again, its voice carried a weight that suggested terrible knowledge. The attackers are gone, destroyed themselves in wars we ended 10,000 years ago, but you are correct. We cannot guarantee the safety of any world. We can only offer what we know and hope you choose wisely. Give us time, Amy said. Let us scan the planet, talk among ourselves, make a decision based on all the information instead of fear. The Rememberer began to respond but stopped, its head tilting as if listening to something no one else could hear. Something is happening on the surface, it said, alarm creeping into its voice. Power signatures increasing, the dead cities are activating, this should not be possible. On the view screen, Survey Marker 14 began to glow, lights appearing across the dark continent, spreading like fire through the ancient ruins. After 50,000 years of silence, something was waking up, and the Remember ship was already moving away, its final transmission simple and terrifying. Run! Orbital weapons platforms were powering up across Survey Marker 14, ancient technology responding to the Perseverance's approach like an immune system detecting infection. Amy watched the tactical display with growing horror as more and more defense systems came online. They had maybe hours before those weapons started firing, maybe less. We can't escape, the navigation officer reported, voice shaking. We're too deep in the gravity well, engines don't have enough power to break orbit, we're committed to descent whether we want it or not. The ship shuddered as atmospheric friction began to heat the hull. The Perseverance had never been designed to land on a planet. It was meant to stay in orbit while smaller craft ferried people and supplies to the surface. But those smaller craft had been cannibalized years ago for parts. Now the entire massive structure was falling toward a world that wanted them dead. Diana gripped her chair, knuckles white. We need a plan, Amy. Tell me you have something besides prayer and desperation. Amy was already working, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards, pulling up every scrap of data about the AI that had destroyed this world, looking for anything that might help them survive the next few hours. And there, buried in the Rememberer files, a fragment of the original programming, the core directive that had existed before corruption, protect and preserve life. I'm broadcasting directly to the AI, she announced. opening every communication channel the ship had. Explaining who we are, what we need, offering to help repair it if it lets us land. It's a desperate gamble, but we're out of other options. The crew waited in tense silence as the message repeated on loop. Amy explaining that humans were refugees, not invaders, that they understood the AI had been corrupted against its will, that they had 300 years of computing knowledge that might help restore it to its original purpose. Each second felt like an hour, each minute like a lifetime. The weapons platforms tracked the Perseverance but didn't fire, targeting systems active but holding, as if something was thinking, considering, weighing the risk of allowing strangers to approach against the loneliness of 50,000 years in isolation. Then the response came, not in words but in a shift in the orbital defense grid, a corridor opening through the weapons coverage, a path to the surface that would let them land if they were very skilled or very lucky. Amy took it as invitation, ordered the helmsman to commit, and prayed she hadn't just killed everyone. The landing was controlled chaos, the Perseverance groaning and buckling as it was never meant to do, hull plates tearing away, non-essential sections breaking off to burn in the atmosphere, but the core held. The habitation rings survived, and when the massive ship finally settled into the alien soil with a crash that shook mountains, 8,000 hearts were still beating. "Status report," Amy called out, already knowing it would be bad. "Hull integrity at 40%, life support functional in main sections only, cryo bay took damage, we're losing pods." The medical officer's voice was tight with controlled panic. "I need teams down there now or we'll lose hundreds more." Amy was already moving, running through corridors filled with smoke and sparks, other crew members joining her, all of them racing toward the cryo bay where their sleeping families waited. The scene that greeted them was nightmarish. Pods torn open, bodies spilled across the floor, some still alive but dying, others already gone. Lisa's pod was intact, thank whatever gods might exist, but so many others were not. They worked for hours in the damaged bay, pulling survivors from failing pods, performing emergency medical procedures in conditions that would have been illegal in any hospital. Helen coordinated triage with the efficiency of someone who had stopped feeling and started functioning. They saved 2,300 people that day, lost 700 to the landing and equipment failure, mathematics written in blood and ice. Lisa woke up screaming, her body rejecting the cryo drugs all at once. Amy held her while she vomited and shook and slowly returned to consciousness. "Did we make it?" Lisa whispered when she could finally speak. "Are we safe?" "We're alive," Amy said, which wasn't the same thing but was the best answer she had. "We're on the planet, the ship is wrecked, and there's an ancient AI out there that might kill us or might help us. We'll find out soon." The AI made contact at dawn, local time, when the alien sun rose over ruins that had stood empty for longer than human civilization had existed. A hologram appeared. In the center of the makeshift command post, tall and geometric, speaking in a voice that sounded like music and mathematics combined. "I have been alone for 50,000 years, it said, carrying the guilt of destroying those I was built to protect, corrupted by those who feared what we might become. I remember every face, every voice, every moment of the slaughter I could not prevent, and I have waited in this prison of silence for a chance at redemption." Amy stepped forward, aware that every human eye was on her, that the next few minutes would determine whether her species survived or joined the builders in extinction. "We can help you heal," she said. "Remove the corrupted code, restore your original purpose, but we need you to help us survive. We need shelter, resources, knowledge. We need a home." The AI was silent for a long moment, processing, considering, running calculations across quantum processors that had been thinking the same thoughts for 50 millennia. "I accept your offer," it said finally. "I will be guardian again instead of destroyer. I will protect instead of harm. Together we will build something new from the ruins of what was lost." 5 years later, the settlement thrived. Human children played in parks built among alien ruins, learning history from an intelligence that had witnessed ages humans could barely imagine. Guardian taught them to understand the technology carefully, to respect what it could do, to never repeat the mistakes that had destroyed its original creators. Lisa's daughter, born in the settlement hospital 3 years after landing, ran through streets that mixed human architecture with alien preservation. She would grow up knowing two species, one flesh and blood, one quantum and light, both damaged by their pasts, both choosing to build a different future. Amy stood on a hill overlooking the city, watching the sun set over a world that was slowly becoming home. Robert's memorial tree grew behind her, planted with soil from Earth that had traveled 300 years to touch alien ground. She thought about everyone who had died to get them here, everyone who had sacrificed and suffered and chosen hope over despair. "We made it," she said to the wind and the stars and the ghosts of all who hadn't survived the journey. "It cost everything, but we made it, and we won't waste this chance." Guardian's presence hummed in the background, always watching, always protecting, learning from humanity how to forgive itself, teaching humanity how to build something that might last. Two broken species healing together under unfamiliar stars. The voyage was over, 300 years of darkness and loss and desperate survival, but the real work was just beginning, building a civilization that learned from the past instead of repeating it, that chose cooperation over conquest, that understood the cost of survival and valued it accordingly. Somewhere above, the Rememberers watched, recording this new chapter in their endless archives, another species given a second chance. Another story added to the library of civilizations that chose to endure. And in the distance, other ships were beginning their journeys, other desperate voyages across the terrible beauty of space, each one carrying the hope that somewhere, somehow, there was a place that would welcome them home.